Hello, I'm Reggie York at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. This is a presentation on the structure of your data analysis. Let's talk about what this presentation is about. In this presentation, you'll be provided guidance on what you need to know before you seek a statistical test for your data. This means you have collected data and wish to examine it statistically. This also means you know what statistics do and are familiar with search concepts as the value of P and so forth. This does not mean you know any particular statistic, but that you know something about what statistics do and you need to use one yourself. That's an assumption. If that's not true, this presentation is not particularly designed for you. Here are the key questions we're going to go over. How many variables are in my analysis? At what level is each of my variables measured? What is the dependent variable and what is the independent variable? When that is relevant, sometimes it's not relevant. Are my variables composed of parent data or independent data? We're going to go over each of these questions one by one in this presentation. Let's start with how many variables are in the analysis. The question here is how many variables are in each analysis you wish to undertake, not how many variables are in your data altogether. Suppose you wish to describe each of the following variables: gender, age, and height. In other words, you want to describe gender, you want to describe age, and you want to describe height. Not the relationship between them, but you want to describe gender, you want to describe age, you want to describe height. Let's suppose that is your task. How many variables do you have for each of these analyses? The answer is 1. Gender, you're going to look at it once. Age, separately, height separately. 1 variable for each of these analyses. Now let's look at when you are examining a relationship between variables. Suppose, for example, you want to know whether there is a relationship between age and gender, and you also want to know if there's a relationship between age and height. Age and gender, and age and height. How many variables are in each analysis? How many? Well, it's 2. First of all, you had age and gender, then you had age and height, so you had 2 variables in each analysis. Now let's look at the relationship between when you have more than 2 variables. Suppose, for example, you wanted to know if gender explains salary when position level is taken into consideration. You want to examine the relationship between these variables. How many variables are in your analysis? You have gender, position level, and salary, right? Okay, you have 3 variables in your analysis. You are looking at the relationship between all 3 of them taken together. So you have 3 variables in your analysis. Let's suppose you're comparing pre-test scores and post-test scores. Let's say you did it for, you gave an anxiety scale, before treatment and after treatment. How many variables are in your analysis? Well, there are 2 variables, pre-test scores on anxiety, post-test scores on anxiety. Now this may be a little bit confusing because on the one hand you may think to yourself, well, there's only 1 variable here, anxiety. Well, but you are measuring it twice, pre-test, post-test. So as far as data analysis is concerned, you have pre-test scores which you are comparing to post-test scores, 2 different variables. Suppose you are comparing gain scores of a treated group with a comparison group. So you've given a pre-test score on anxiety and a post-test score on anxiety for a group of treated clients, and you're computing a gain score. So even though you have pre-test scores and post-test scores, then you're using that to derive a gain score for your clients. You measure the waiting list group the same way, pre-test, post-test, so you have a gain score. Now you had pre-test scores and post-test scores, but the variable of interest to you in your analysis is gain. In other words, you want to know, is the amount of gain on anxiety greater for the treated clients than the persons in the comparison group? How many variables? I hope you said 2. Gain scores for the treated group, gain scores for the comparison group. Okay, now let's look at level of measurement. There are 4 levels of measurement, but only the first 3 are relevant to selecting a statistical measure in the particular system I am using here. The 3 relevant levels are nominal, ordinal, and interval. We're going to go over each of these individually. By the way, the one that's not relevant, in case you are curious, is ratio. Nominal level, let's look at this one first of all. Variables measured at the nominal level place answers into categories such as male or female, Republican or Democrat, and so forth. In other words, it simply puts people into categories. Here are some examples. What is your political party affiliation? Are you Democrat, Republican, or other? What is the section of town where you live? East side, north side, south side? The third one, what is the category of the service that you're receiving? Counseling, education, or something else? In each of these cases, people are simply placed into categories. They're not given a number that has numerical meaning, just placed into categories. That's nominal. Ordinal level is where you have variables measured where people are placed into categories, or things are placed into categories that are ordered from low to high. Categories, but they have an order. That's why it's called ordinal. Example, how much do you agree with this statement? My life will get better. Do you strongly agree? Agree? Or are you undecided? Disagree or strongly disagree? Notice these are ordered. Strongly agree is the highest level of agreement. Strongly disagree is the lowest level of agreement. So these are categories that are ordered. You now have an ordinal variable. An interval variable, variables measured at the interval level have values that are numerical in nature, like scores on a test, or height, or weight. One of the things about it is the distance between values on an interval variable are equal. 1 pound is equal to every other pound in a measurement that's based on pounds. If I ask you the question, if I had 25 bad things that might have happened to you in the past year and said, how many of these things have happened to you? What level would that be? Well, it would be interval, because I didn't ask you to check one. I didn't want to ask you to put yourself in one of those categories. I simply said, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 15, 18? How many of them? When you ask that kind of question, it is interval in nature. Let's look at dependent and independent variables. Now, the distinction between these is not always necessary in examining statistics. In my particular situation, in my presentation that I'm doing right now, the only time it becomes relevant is when we are examining 3 or more, the relationship among 3 or more variables. That's the only time that happens to be relevant to this particular presentation I'm making today. The dependent variable is dependent upon the other variable, which is known as the independent variable. In other words, the independent variable has an influence upon the dependent variable. One way to think about it is the variable that's dependent. Well, if you're dependent, what are you dependent upon? You're dependent upon the independent one. That's one way to look at it. Paired data and independent data. Paired data is when you have matched scores, like pre-test and post-test scores for each client. Let's look at this. We have client number 24B had a pre-test score of 23. That client had a post-test score of 29. Client number 17C had a pre-test score of 14, a post-test score of 19. Client 29B had a pre-test score of 12, and a post-test score of 12. So you have here matched scores for 3 clients. A pre-test score, which is then that person's post-test score. So the statistics take that into consideration when you are examining this kind of study. Independent data are drawn from different people. If you measure gender, you have data on various people on the variable of gender, right? 47 people told me their gender. That's 47 different people. They're not matched in any way. If you measure salary, you have data on various people on the variable of salary. 77 people recorded their salary. I now have that data. It is independent, not matched. At this point, I want you to examine a couple of examples. I'm going to present the information on the screen. I want you to hit the pause button so you'll have time to think about that information and answer the questions I pose. Then hit the resume button and hear my answer to the question. Okay, here is the situation, and you are being asked to answer these questions under item number 2. How many variables, at what level is each measured? Is one of them dependent? Are data paired or independent? So I want you to hit the pause button right now when you have answered those various questions at the then hit the resume button and I'll give you my answers. Okay, I assume you have answered those questions and have hit the resume button. So how many variables are in this analysis? Gender and salary are the 2 variables. So we have 2 variables. At what level is each measured? Gender, male or female, therefore it is nominal. Salary is measured by dollars, that is interval. Is one of these variables a dependent variable? As I mentioned, I think, gender is something that one of the things you need to think about is it's probably always going to be the independent variable because things don't change gender. Gender might explain other things, but other things don't explain what your gender is, normally. So in this situation, salary is the dependent variable. Do we have paired data or independent data? The answer is we have independent data. We don't have matched scores of one kind. We simply have data on salary for everybody. We have gender data, and we want to look at the relationship between them. So we have independent data. What about this example? Let's do the same thing. If you will now hit the pause button, then come back, I'll give you my answer. Okay, I assume you have answered these questions and have hit the resume button now. How many variables? We have gender, we have salary, and we have position level. 3 variables. We are examining all 3 together. That's the nature of the question here. At what level is each measured? Gender is nominal, salary is interval, position level is nominal. Are they paired data or independent? These are independent data. Okay, let's take another example here, and the same thing. If you will stop now and hit the pause button, and then after you answer the questions, hit the resume button. Okay, you're measuring depression for clients before and after treatment. How many variables? You have 2 variables, pre-test scores and post-test scores. At what level is each variable measured? Each is measured at the interval level. We're talking about scores. Is one of these variables the dependent variable? Basically, this question is not relevant to this particular issue. Technically, the depression is the dependent variable, but we're looking at 2 different scores. So let's ignore this question for this particular one. Are data paired or independent? They are paired. Match scores for pre-test, post-test. Okay. I hope this helps with your preparation for finding a statistic.